Well, good morning. It is Thursday, March 11th, and we are gathered for our morning devotion, again using N.T. Wright's book, Lent for Everyone, the Gospel of Mark. And today's passage is from Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 30, with the focus on 8:22 through 30. They arrived at Bethsaida. A blind man was brought to Jesus, and they begged him to touch him. He took his hand, led him off outside the village, and put spittle on his eyes. And then he laid his hands on him and said, "Can you see anything?" "I can see people," said the man, peering around, "but they look like trees walking about." Then Jesus laid his hands on him once more. This time he looked harder, and his sight came back. He could see everything clearly. Jesus sent him back home. "Don't even go into the village," he said. Jesus and his disciples came to the village of Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he asked his disciples, "What are people saying that I am?" "John the Baptist," they say. "Some say Elijah, and others say you are one of the prophets." "Well, what about you?" Jesus asked. "Who do you say I am?" Peter spoke up, "You're the Messiah." And Jesus gave them strict orders not to tell anybody about him. And Dr. Wright writes in these words, "I have a special memory of this passage, going right back to my university days. I had not been a very good pupil in my English literature class at school. I had not really discovered something that any sensible reader of novels and plays learned early on, namely that a good writer will use one incident to illuminate another. The writer won't insult the reader's intelligence by saying, 'So you see, this bit goes well with that bit.' This image explains the meaning of that incident. Good writers use all kinds of imagery to make their various points, but perhaps the best sort of imagery is that which arises naturally and properly within the story itself. Anyways, I was my first year of undergraduate study in New Testament, and one of the commentators I was reading pointed out that the rather obvious feature of this present passage in Mark, the story of Jesus healing the blind man in Bethsaida, followed the same pattern of the story of Jesus asking his followers about who they thought he was. Once you see that, you will not only understand that Mark was doing in this passage, you will discover that good writers do it quite a lot. And this discovery makes reading itself, not just reading the Gospels, an exciting and dramatic journey. It opens your eyes, which is, of course, the point, because the way Jesus opened the man's eyes was in two stages. First, he put spittle on his eyes, laid his hands on him, and asked if he could see anything. "I can see people," the man said, "but they look like trees walking about." Halfway there, in other words, but needing a second touch. Then, after the second touch, he could see everything clearly. And Jesus, having led him out of the village in order to do this healing, told him to go back home, but not to go into the village itself. For some reason, this had to be done in secret, and it was supposed to try to stay a secret. The parallel between this and what happens next is so close that if Mark had been a novelist, we could say that he was constructed as a convenient fiction. Jesus took his disciples away from their normal territory in the region of Galilee around Capernaum. Again, away up north in the slopes of Mount Hermon. He wanted his conversation to be private. However, this distinction is significant too. They go to the group of villages that had been renamed in recent memory in the honor of Caesar Augustus. It was the territory of Herod Philippi, the brother of Antipas and the first husband of Herodias, hence the name Caesarea Philippi, distinguishing it from the other towns called Caesarea, particularly the one about 75 miles away on the Mediterranean coast. This town, in other words, has royal associations, both local with Herod and global with Caesar. Mark was certainly very conscious of this, and there is every reason to suppose that Jesus was too. If his disciples gave him the answer he wanted, they should be aware just what they were saying. So the first question corresponding to the first touch of the blind man's eyes, who are people saying that I am, comes back to the answer, reminding us of the God's people appear like trees walking around. In other words, halfway there, but not yet in clear focus. John the Baptist, some say Elijah, or others say one of the prophets. Nice try, not bad. And this tells us quite a bit about the style of Jesus' public career, and that the way people perceived it, John, Elijah, prophets, hardly giving us an image of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. He was acting with power and speaking equally powerful words. But then the second question, with Herod and Caesar in the background, what about you? Who do you say I am? Well, you're the Messiah, Peter says. It comes like a thunderclap, opening the skies with a flash. Mark's readers have known all along, of course, because of the voice of the baptism, but Jesus was so different from the Messiahs of popular imagination. He was a healer, not a military leader. He spoke about forgiveness, not revenge. He was challenging and redefining Israel's ancient symbols, not reinforcing them. And yet the culminative weight of all that Peter and the others had witnessed spoke for itself and gathered itself together in one great leap of faith and hope, in utter trust in this strange but compelling man and a God who had so clearly sent him. Messiah, not the second person of the Trinity. That realization would dawn more slowly as the final layer of disguise was penetrated. Indeed, it was something been possible in the history of Christianity for people to behind the big dogmatic affirmation that Jesus is God, or at least Jesus is the Son of God, and to forget that the whole point of his mission was that in and through his work, God was becoming king, king of Israel, and the king of the world. Messiah meant king, and king was fighting talk in Caesarea Philippi, of all places. No wonder Jesus told them strictly not to tell anybody. Just as he had sent the blind man away, he had already the subject of critical comment. The Romans had a well-developed spy system. No doubt the Roman governor had already a file on him. Any gossip about kingship would be in serious danger. Perhaps that's why many people in our own days have shielded away from this idea too. That's the trouble with learning to read. It opens up all kinds of possibilities, a new challenge. But isn't that what Lent is supposed to be all about? And so this parable, and I guess I really didn't understand it until I read this earlier, it comes in two phases. It takes two phases to heal this blind man. And it took two phases for the disciples to figure out who Jesus was. The first one, Jesus put spittle on the man's eyes and he sees trees. The first one for the disciples, well, they say you're John the Baptist or Elijah or the prophets. The second one, Jesus puts his hands on the blind man again and he sees. Jesus asks that question, who do you say I am? And they get it the second time, you're the Messiah. But it's the context of where this is taking place that is important. Caesarea Philippi, a Roman stronghold, a military camp, brings to mind, as he said, about kings and everything. Messiah means anointed one, means king, however you want to translate it. And they were seen in the very midst of this great and powerful region, where if people had heard that, they would have gone and told the Roman officials that Jesus was claiming to be king. And again, that would have been one of those stepping stones that led to his inevitable demise. But that's why God came. That's why Jesus came, to show us that the true king of the world, the true king of the universe, the true king of everything is Jesus. And if we trust the earthly powers more than we trust God, we are failing in God's kingdom. The earthly powers come and go. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad. It doesn't really matter. We have to live with them. But God's power and love and grace as king is always there for us. God is the true king. Because God created all this. God is the true king of this universe.